It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you reach out to me through my email, oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. We have as our guest today, Raven Rollins. She's got a podcast called the Sirens Podcast that you can catch that. It's up on all the podcast platforms, on Spotify and all that kind of stuff. You can find her on Twitter at the Raven Rollins. And also, there's a couple of books we'll be talking about today. Is Sins of the South, a true crime case collection to advocate for. And then also a brand new one, the ink's not even dry yet, allegedly, true crime from Pontotoc County in Oklahoma over there. You want to meet her in person? You go down there May 24th to Barnes & Noble in Tulsa, Oklahoma on 71st Street. You got to be there sharp online at noon to get in. And they're going to kick you out at 5 o'clock at night. So you got to be there on time. You want to meet Raven Rollins. Miss Raven Rollins, are you there?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thank you so much for coming. Before we get into these books here, allegedly true crime from Pontotoc County, tell us about yourself. Who is Raven Rollins?
Who is Raven Rollins?
Right, that's a tough one, right? Yeah.
That's the question.
That's the hardest question of the show.
It really is, because, a lot of people in this business, we are in this business, talk about other people, not ourselves. But, so I've been working in the legal field almost all my life, since I was a senior in high school. Been working for lawyers, doing legal research, and I got my EMT certification back in 2007. I've been a 911 dispatcher and worked in first response a little bit. I've kind of got all of this experience that I thought would be interesting to bring to a podcast. Which in 2018, I was actually working as a home health nurse, and she was like absolutely obsessed with true crime. My patient was. And, she was a paraplegic, so I would go in and she couldn't get up and move around. So we would turn on, documentaries, or, we'd read books, or we'd just talk about cases for hours and hours. And it kind of re-sparked that, in me to talk about cases and, find out information for her, because she couldn't really do that on her own. And so we would do that. And in 2018, I think I had been with her for about 2 years at that point, maybe one. But my own cousin was murdered in his own front yard back in my hometown. And I was just shocked. I was stunned. And I went to her and I was like, we talk about this stuff all the time, and here it is. And you just kind of think that this stuff doesn't happen to you. It doesn't happen in your hometown. But then, I'm sitting that night and I'm talking to my husband about it, and he's telling me about his own cousin who was murdered in 2010. And we have, a lot of things that we're discussing, around the kitchen table going, well, there's this happening and this happening. And I don't know if you've ever heard of John Grisham or The Innocent Man. He's got a book. The Dreams of Ada was another book that covered a couple of cases out of my hometown of Ada. So we're talking about those, and we're like, there's just so much happening in Ada back in our hometown, and things that happened when we grew up and people that we knew. And I got to thinking, I was like, at the time I couldn't talk about my own cousin's case because it was still, it hadn't even gone to trial yet. And I was like, being in the legal field, I knew that that's not something I could talk about yet. But I thought, my husband has this happen to him. There's got to be more people out there that I can advocate for. There's got to be more stories. I know of several, of the bigger things other than the innocent man that happened in Ada. It'd be really interesting to be able to sit and talk to, people who have been through what I'm going through, and maybe we can help each other. I can tell their stories, and I can, also get maybe some guidance. And And so the Sirens podcast was born. Its actual name is Sirens, a Southern true crime podcast, but I always call it the Sirens podcast for some reason. And, you know, the name it kind of came from literal sirens. You know, he's a first responder. I'm a first responder. And so, well, I worked in 911. So, but from there, it just kind of blossomed. I dove into my own hometown, and I dug out all of these cases. And the crazy part about my hometown is that it is 15 square miles. Ada, Oklahoma. It is not big at all. At the time that I started the podcast, I believe there was only 15 to 17,000 people living in the city. And so for it to have such a high murder capita for 15 square miles, like the murders that happen there are actually more murders that happen there per capita than where I live now in Tulsa, which is insane because Tulsa has, like, I don't know, almost 1 million people in it.
Yeah, I was going to say, why don't you move? if they're dropping like flies on your front lawn out there.
I did move.
You know?
I did move.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it you know, just looking at it and thinking there are so many crazy things that happen in this town. Let's start covering some of it. And so I started covering cases. That's where the podcast started. I had 18 to 20 hours of, you know, finished podcasting hours just on Ada alone, I believe in my first and second season. So a lot of content there from just one small town.
Yeah, I was worried we were going to hear gunshots in the background. They cut the interview short. Raven Rollins.
Well, I'm not there now, so yeah.
Yeah. How could that be, though? Was it a high crime? It wasn't a dangerous neighborhood, was it? Ada, Oklahoma? I've never even heard of it.
Ada, you know what? It actually was number one.
Really?
For a lot of years in murder per capita for Oklahoma.
And what is that? Gangs, drugs? What could it be?
Oh, you name it.
Really?
Just name it. You know, gangs, drugs, trafficking, just, you know, petty larcenies and robberies gone wrong and cold cases. And I mean, you just name it.
Yeah, I was born in the Bronx, you know, later on, Manhattan, moved to Vegas. You know, I thought I lived in some tough towns, but Ada, when I think of Oklahoma, I think of farms. I don't know what's going on in Oklahoma. Oil fields, I guess, right? What do I know about Oklahoma? But now I find
we got those too.
Yeah, it's a crime capital of the world here. Let me ask you about the 911, being a 911 dispatcher. What was that like? What kind of calls was that in Ada too, with all that crime?
Yeah. So,
wow.
Well, yeah, it was. And in Ada, you know, it's not like it is here in Tulsa. In Tulsa, you have like specific dispatchers for either EMS or fire or police. Back in Ada, you did everything. I mean, you were everything. You dispatched to everything. We all sat in a little room together back to back. And, you know, there was like 3 or 4 of us, you know, at any given time. And we're taking calls from anything and everything and dispatching anything and everything. And what's interesting is that they train you, or they trained me at least, with real 911 phone calls.
Wow.
And so... yeah, and it was kind of like a you know, sink or swim. They were like, if you can't handle this, you know, hearing it live, then this probably isn't the job for you. And so I got through several of those. The very last, I remember the last training call that I had was actually included now in my book, allegedly. It was the case of Caitlin Wooten, and I actually heard all of that happening live. And, you know, for those of you that don't know, Caitlin Wooten was a 16-year-old girl. She was abducted from school by her stepfather. I actually want to say it was her mom's ex-boyfriend at the time. And, you know, he had just gone to jail for holding her mother at gunpoint for several hours and kidnapping her. And he had just got out of jail for that and went and abducted her. He took her into some wooded area and ended her life and then ended his. And to hear that call come through, as a dispatcher, and to wonder if you would have done the same thing as the dispatcher you're listening to, or if you could have handled that at that time, because it was from the mother. And you have this distressed mother who is desperately looking for her daughter, and she knows that this man is capable of horrendous things. It's heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. And needless to say, I never really had any calls come in like that. I worked there for several years. The last call that I did have was somewhat like that. And that kind of ended my career in 911 because I just couldn't handle it. I just couldn't handle listening to those things happening live and not being able to be there and do something about it. So my last call that I ever took was two men who were basically having a gunfight in their yard. And the call came in from a family man next door who was trying to protect his children, and there's, stray gunshots going everywhere. And it was chaotic and it was heartbreaking. And one of those men, I do believe, ended up being killed. But I was like, I'm out. I've got to find a different way to help people and to advocate for people, because being in it when it's happening is not for me. I've got to figure out a way to do like an after the fact sort of thing, which is when I kind of went back into legal research and really got back into the civil and criminal legal side of things. So.
Yeah. And now, so you don't do 911 anymore?
No, it's hard.
Yeah. No, I could imagine. It's
hard.
They just, down here, I'm down here in Florida now, and they just came up with a new system here in my region where you can send photographs over 911 now. It's a whole new...
oh, yeah.
But why haven't they had that for the past 10 years? It just makes no sense to me. They could have had... And why can't you talk directly to the cops in the car on their onboard computer? It just makes no sense. We should have had this a long time ago. What have you found the limitations are with 911 dispatch, and how could we improve it?
Well, again, I worked in dispatch around 2007 for a couple of years, so I am not really privy to, other than case studies. I don't really know too much about what goes on in police dispatch anymore.
Oh, gotcha.
My husband is a paramedic, so really the only knowledge I have is of, medical dispatch these days. I do know that it has had some crazy advancements. Back when I was a dispatcher, we could still triangulate with cell phone services and stuff like that, but it has just significantly improved. I agree with you. I think that some of those improvements could have been implemented long ago, and there are still laws being made around it. For instance, the Kelsey Smith law, that's still being implemented within, each state in the United States, which is where police can instantly have access to someone's cell phone data. They don't have to wait and get a warrant and stuff like that. So I think that is really important. That's something that needs to keep moving forward. And if we just stay on the same trajectory, I think we're going to do okay. But there are some things that really still need to be in place, like that law, that could really help out.
Yeah, you got Fourth Amendment concerns too. I don't want, if I'm going to call 911, I don't want them having access to everything on my phone. I'm trying to help somebody out.
And that's where it's at. So I mean, it's one of those things where, do we know that this person is actually missing, and can we go ahead and access that data, or do we need a warrant? Yeah, I mean, I get it. But, there are horrible things that happen out there that I do feel like would have maybe not escalated so far if we had access, quicker, let's just say. But
Oh yeah, and you see over and over, the cops respond, and they don't even know what the call's about. What's going on? Why am I here? We can definitely improve on that. That stuff is ridiculous.
Exactly.
But now this Caitlin Wooten case, this is fascinating. Now that you took the call on this, right? But which book is it? Which book did you discuss this Caitlin Wooten case?
So it's in Allegedly. I didn't take the call. It was my training call for 911. Gotcha. I was actually so Caitlin Wooten, that happened in 2005, and I was still a senior in high school when that happened. But so there was actually a law that came out from it. Let's go back just a little bit because Caitlin Wooten, again, she was kidnapped by her mother's ex. And it was really tragic. My younger brother, I have 6 brothers, but one of my younger brothers actually was very close with Caitlin, and they were good friends. And this, it doesn't happen in your hometown sort of thing have come to fruition with me throughout my life, because there have been people like that have been impacted so closely by just, the ripple effect of what happens when something like this takes place. And it was a really sad, tragic event. Excuse me, I had a hiccup. The thing that came out of it was Caitlin's law. And, it championed this passage of what it was, Bill 1037, I believe what it was, State Bill 1037. It had 2 really big reforms in it that were tough on crime and also kind of smart for Oklahoma families. It aimed at strengthening bail laws. So it would require a person charged with some sort of violent crime or kidnapping to prove to the court before they posted bail that they were not a danger to the public. So it really pertains to this case because Caitlin's mother had just been kidnapped by this man, just held at gunpoint for hours and hours and hours in her own home. They had to basically storm the castle and take him, to jail. She was unharmed, but they did not let her really know that he was being released on bail. She had no time to prepare or to prepare her children. They found out about an hour after he had been released, and they had to really work hard to try to figure out where her kids were that day, how to get them home, how to get them safe. And it was just too late. It was too late by the time that she, figured out where Caitlin was, and they went there. They saw her car in the parking lot, door open. They already knew that he had gotten to her. So
had gotten to the kid,
passed,
you're saying? Had gotten to the daughter?
Yeah, gotten to Caitlin.
And how old was the daughter?
She was 16.
How old was she? Was 16, yeah, so she had her own car.
16. Yeah, she did. She was into cheerleading and all this other stuff, and she was actually at cheerleading practice that day. What she would usually do is she would go and pick up her little sister, which is a year younger than her, after cheerleading practice, but she never showed up, and that's when they figured, well, she's probably still at cheerleading practice, or maybe something happened. So they went to the school, found her car, which the door, it was just sitting there with the door ajar. It looked like he had just taken her as she was getting into her car to go pick up her little sister. And that was it. No one ever spotted him around town. He, I believe, knew where he was taking her. He placed a phone call to the mother once he got there and said, try to keep this non-gory. He said that basically you ticked me off, and now I'm going to take something that you love from you. That's obviously a paraphrase. And he took her life. He set her down on a log in the middle of this pasture and took her life, and then took his own. Ugh. And they actually had to get, helicopters and stuff off on in the sky to figure out where he went, and find her and him, which they did eventually. Unfortunately, there just wasn't enough time. And so that law, the Caitlin's law, basically says, if he wouldn't have had bail, maybe this could have been.
What was his bail? How much was it?
It was something like $10,000, I believe. It wasn't very much, actually.
Gotcha. Okay, and for the audience out there, there's a couple. Now they do say they're going to notify domestic violence, those kind of cases. They say they're going to notify the victim when they're releasing them from jail, but a lot of times they don't. But even if you can't call down to the jail and say, hey, can you let me know when this guy's dressing out? You can, and they will help you out with that kind of stuff, even in a big town like Vegas. Otherwise, if it's a insignificant kind of case, but you still want to keep an eye on him, you can call the jail and say, hey, listen, this guy's a friend of mine. He's got mental illness, and when they leave him out there, he's going to be wandering the streets. I want to be there to pick him up, and they'll call you up on that, too. You can kind of trick them into telling you when they're getting out, too, as well. Well,
and here in Oklahoma, so another thing that came from that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because another thing that came from that is what we call here in Oklahoma is Vine or VineLink. And it's an app or a phone call service, or you can go online. I think it's just vinelink.com. And it's called the Victim Information Notification Every Day. That's what Vine stands for. It's a 24-hour service. What it does is you can basically tell it to watch an offender that's, in county, in prison somewhere, whatever. Watch that offender, and if that offender is either released from prison for some reason, like fully released, or they even move facilities, or they're checked out and into a medical facility, or if they pass away, you can ask to be notified immediately. Now, the problem with that, a little bit of reform, my soapbox is that I have found, following all of these cases and following all of these offenders, that it is not really immediate. They say it's immediate, but I have found that it takes a couple of hours to 12 hours for victims to get notified. But it's better, I guess, than not being notified at all. So I always push for victim families to sign up for VineLink and use that service, because, you might not find out that information otherwise.
Yeah, they definitely don't have that in every county, that's for sure. And like you said, there's so much chaos in the release of these inmates, these defendants. And sometimes there's a warrant hold in another county. Are they going to move them over there? Are they going to take them? Do they want them? Do they not want them? And then the guy's out on the street before you even know it. A lot of chaos in that whole situation. And
right.
You'd think, and also, too, when someone gets arrested, you'd think you could call up and know right away, oh, he's not in the system yet. Well, you know what I mean? You'd think there would be a better way to track all this.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah.
The county jails are usually pretty good, where if you call up and you're like, hey, do you have an inmate right now? They'll be like, yeah, he's in here. But the release part is where everything kind of gets jumbled and misconstrued. It's like, well, I don't know. Maybe he's here. Maybe he's not. Maybe we let him go an hour ago. Maybe it was yesterday. I don't know.
No, it's so true. You would think, they would have more. You're trying to track defendants and people. You'd think they'd have a better system of tracking these people. Now, which book is that in? That's in the
That's in Allegedly, yeah. Allegedly has, my goodness, I have never even counted how many cases it has in it. But it is a compendium, basically, a collection of cases. Most of the cases are what I've had already done podcast episodes, because, I already did the research and everything on it. I just put in a little more muscle, a little more grease into it for the book. So there are like a dozen or so cases, too many cases, I'll say, for one super small town, for one small county.
Well, Allegedly seems to be the most popular book, and also too has the best ratings too, 4.5 stars on Amazon. So give us an idea. What else is covered in Allegedly True Crime from Pontotoc County, Oklahoma?
So whatever your true crime heart desires. I've got all kinds of cases in here. there are cases that are solved. There are cases that are unsolved. There are mysteries. There's some more gruesome stuff in there. There's even a historical case in there. So I basically covered all of the major crimes in Ada, Oklahoma, back to like around when it became an actual town. So the first case in there is a historical case of some hangings that happened in Ada in 1909. So there's like a Wild West story in there. So whatever you tend to gravitate to as a true crime reader, you're going to find something in there. And this, I have found tons of people using this book as a book that they do for their book clubs because of that, because everyone kind of finds something that they like inside of it.
Yeah, that's right. And you were telling me that the East Central University is going to be using one of your books in the fall 225 as like a textbook. What's going on there?
Yeah, so East Central called me up. There's two professors there that called me up and said, "Hey, we want to build this new class, and it is going to be called." It's going to be called True Crime Narratives of Justice. They're kind of trying to blend true crime with advocacy and journalism and writing and ethics, and they kind of want their students to see all points of view when it comes to writing about a true crime case. So they told me, they were like, you're really great at kind of showing all sides of the spectrum here, because, you might show the side of, a victim's mother or the perpetrator's family or law enforcement officers, just anybody and everybody. I always kind of try to, say, like, what did they feel? What were they doing? What were they thinking? How was this for them? How did this affect the community? How does, stuff like that. And so they asked me if it would be okay if they built this course on allegedly and used allegedly as the textbook, like the main textbook in their course. I said, of course, because that's amazing. I'm honored, absolutely honored to do that. They asked me to come and speak at some point. And when they opened up this class to be filled, they filled it in the first 4 days of enrollment, and they actually had to raise the cap. They had to get a bigger room. They had to, it was kind of crazy how many people wanted to be a part of this course. And so I hope that this is a course that, can have some longevity and will be around for many, many years.
Well, not only that, but now that's required reading for the course, you can raise the price of the book, right? You can jack it up.
I think that might be illegal.
Don't blame it on those tariffs there, Raven. Come on. The ink went up, the paper went up. It's not Raven's fault. Price gouging Rollins, they're going to call her. Raising price gouging Rollins from the Sirens podcast. You can find her there on Twitter at The Raven Rollins, and also on Instagram at the Sirens podcast. And meet her in person over there in Oklahoma. Where is that? May 24th at Barnes & Noble in Tulsa, Oklahoma on 71st Street. What is now, you were telling me about this other guy, Daniel Furr. What's his story?
Right. So Daniel Furr is actually in both of my books. The first one that I put him in was Sins of the South, and that is a true deep dive into Daniel's case. Now, Daniel Furr was the very first case that I ever covered on the podcast. It's kind of my baby, like my oldest or whatever. But yeah, so it's the first one I covered on the Sirens podcast. And, at the time I didn't really know what I was doing. And so I just kind of gathered the information that I could gather, and I threw it into an episode. A couple of years later, I thought maybe we should go and talk to Gail, which is his mother. And so I went down and I spent some time with Gail and Chelsea, and they had tons of files that I had never seen or looked through. And so we dug through that, and I came out with a way better knowledge of his case. And I thought, I need to redo this. And so I redid the episode for the podcast. And then when the thought of a book came along, I thought Daniel's is a perfect case to put in there. It would be a great one to advocate for. It's still cold. So a lot of people, small towns, they talk, they got rumors, and you never know who's going to come up with something somewhere. So I thought this would be a great one. It's my hometown. So let me tell you just a quick rundown of what happened in Daniel's case. So Daniel was a boy back in 1995 in Ada, Oklahoma. And he had been kind of running with a bad crowd. Now, we talked about Ada having gangs earlier, and he was being inducted into a gang called Crips 8 Ball. And he wasn't quite sure about this. He was a very independent boy. He didn't stay home much. And so, I think he was kind of teetering with whether he wanted to join this gang or not. Regardless, he was inducted, and then he decided that he didn't want to be a part of it anymore. Well, you can't really do that with gangs. You can't really go back on it. So there was a lot of tension, a lot of animosity with the other gang members. Now, remember, he's 15 years old. These other gang members were around 18 and younger. So all of this happened, within school-aged children, basically. The gang leader was an 18-year-old boy named Anthony Taylor, and he had already been a huge bully in high school, not just to Daniel, but a lot of other people. A lot of people were scared of him. His father was a known gang member. And so, when he got inducted, I personally think that Daniel seemed to think that if he got inducted in this gang, he would be protected from those gang members that had been harassing and bullying him. That wasn't the case. And so when he decided to get out, that's when everything started kind of crumbling. Daniel had left home. He had all of these problems with these gang members, and he had left home and went to, in Ada, we have this big thing every year for the 4th of July at Wintersmith Park. Everybody goes. Everybody. He went to this big event that we do every year for the 4th of July. All the other kids were there. A bunch of school kids were there. A bunch of people witnessed seeing him there. And technically, that's the last time he was seen. That would have been July 4th. There's a couple of other witnesses that say that they saw him on July 7th. That is uncorroborated at this time. There's only like one person that says that.
Well, what about his family, though? These kids, you said he's how old? 15 years old, and he's missing from the 4th to the 7th?
Yep, he was missing. He's 15. He was kind of flopping between his mom and his dad's house. He also stayed gone. He just stayed gone a lot. He had actually been a runaway a couple of times and reported as a runaway up to this point a couple of times because he just left and he didn't stay home, and he wanted to be independent. So his family actually...
You said his dad was in the gang too, or I guess retired from the gang. But what about his mom? Was she a stable person? What was going on with her?
No, his dad wasn't in the gang. The gang, the child gang leader, Anthony Taylor, his dad was in the gang.
Gotcha. So then what was going on with his parents, his mom and dad? They just weren't keeping track of him?
So, it was 1995. His mother also had other children. much smaller children. Chelsea was the youngest, and she was 6 years younger than him. And he was very hard to deal with. So when he decided to storm off and leave, they would go report him as missing. And, you know, that's kind of, Gail would go out and look for him herself. But they, after so many times of him being reported missing, the police just kind of didn't do much about it anymore.
Now, this also happened in that little town of Ada?
Yes, in Ada.
Well, what kind of police department do they have there? How many cops do they have?
Well, it's funny. It's funny you say that, Ed, because
I'm starting to worry.
The theme of allegedly, and again, if you have read The Innocent Man, the theme here is that there may have been a lot of corruption happening in the town. Yeah. That I'm not going to say that's true or untrue. I will say that is the rumor, and you know, if you read allegedly, you'll hear a lot of the same DA names and officer names and stuff come up, and you can make your own assumptions as to what's going on there. But I will say that the police at the time were somewhat uninterested in finding Daniel at this point. So, you know, if Gail couldn't find him herself, then, you know, he was just gone. They did see him, at least Chelsea remembers seeing him on the 4th of July at the park. But after that, he disappeared. And this wasn't unlike him. When he did leave, he would stay gone for weeks at a time and then just, you know, show up back at home. So it wasn't unlike him at all. Gail went and reported him missing around the 10th of July. So a couple of days after he had been gone or last seen, she went ahead and reported him missing. They didn't even really ask too many questions. Like normally they ask, you know, what was he last wearing? What was your last interaction? Stuff with that. And they didn't really even ask those questions. They were just kind of tired of looking for him at this point. And then on July 11th, there was a body found. And this body was found kind of on the outskirts of town in the bottom of an old rock quarry. And it was quickly ruled. Now, I just want to throw this out here. In both of the books, you'll learn a bunch of different things about decomposition and, you know, all of that technical stuff. I believe that body was not Daniel. It was very decomposed for a boy who had only been missing at the time for around 4 days. Like to the point where this body was unrecognizable. You could not call in someone to, you know, view the body and ask, is this so-and-so? So they had to send the body off to get ID'd with dental. And there was a lot of issues with the dental work because Daniel had not actually had any dental work since he was 11 years old. So his records were very old. They were from when he was 11 and he was now 15. And they somehow used that to confirm his identity with the body. Now, I have a copy of that dental comparison, and when you look at it, there is a lot of questions. And to me, only 2 teeth that may have been a match out of 32 teeth.
And no DNA?
Now, here's where it gets hairy. So no DNA at the time. Later, years later, and I do also want to add that there was a discrepancy in the description on the autopsy report of the body itself. So on the exact same report, there's a description at the top of the body, and then there's a description at the bottom of the same body, and those descriptions don't match, nor do they match Daniel at all. So the biggest description initially was that this body was 25 years old, that he had long black hair, at least shoulder-length black hair. He was like 6 foot. He was like 250 pounds. This did not match Daniel at all. The later description was that the body was 5'4", 5'3" or 5'4", weighed like 90 pounds, had short brown hair. Like, we're all over the place with this autopsy report. Again, none of that matches Daniel. They get this dental comparison, supposed dental comparison, and they make an ID that it is Daniel, and everybody is basically told to move on with their lives. All right. So years later, Gail still has issues because she went to the police and said, do you have crime scene photos or something? Because she was never allowed to view the body. And I would like to see, if what this hair on the body looked like, if it was long hair, because Daniel had a buzz cut, and that's, like, you can't grow your hair out in 4 days to be shoulder length from a buzz cut. So she was shown photos, and she could see that the body had long shoulder length hair. When she confronted, the officer holding this picture, he said, oh, you're just in denial. He took the pictures from her, wouldn't let her see anything else, and that was it. They would not let her have access to anything else after that. Now, I went through and I found a bunch of statements and a bunch of people that corroborated her. That I actually found the funeral director, oddly enough, after all these years, he spoke to me and he said he blatantly remembers the long black hair. He went and picked the body up that day and transferred it to Oklahoma City for the autopsy. And this was his first homicide. He said, I remember it really well because it was my first homicide I'd ever done. And, it really stuck with me. He said he blatantly remembers the long black hair. And that was corroborated again later with other people. So the real question, around 2008 was, did we bury Daniel Furr? And Gail is asking these questions, and she's starting to push for an exhumation. When she pushes for an exhumation, all of a sudden, the authorities have something, we have some DNA and some hair that we can, compare to your hair, Gail, and see if it's match. The problem with that is that quote-unquote evidence came out of nowhere. It apparently didn't exist to her before then. She'd asked about it previously, never existed until she started talking about exhumation. And then all of a sudden, this manila envelope shows up with a couple hairs in it and blood on a leaf.
Was this envelope, was this like an evidence envelope? Was it sealed? Was it taped? Was it dated? Who signed for?
It had in handwriting the name Daniel Furr on it. No chain of evidence. We have no idea where it was collected from, where it had been stored for the last however many years. Like, it had been 11 years at that point. No idea. Insanity. And yet they said, no, you don't need to exhume the body. We have this right here. We'll go ahead. We'll run a match on it and see if it comes back. If it does, then, we've done our due diligence and you should move on.
And also, too, it's very odd that they're just volunteering to pick up the expense for all this. We'll do it for you. That's unusual, too, as well.
Yeah.
But let's back up here just a bit, because you mentioned that there's some discrepancies in the autopsy report. Now, was there one autopsy report, or was there more than one? Because in the same report, there's discrepancies? Yes,
only one autopsy report. And I actually include that autopsy report in the book, allegedly, and in Sins of the South, both because it's so odd that you would think that those descriptions came from two different reports or an amended report or something like that. Yeah. But they are on the same report. It's one page, literally at the top. It has one description. At the bottom, it has a completely separate description.
And the book we're talking about is Allegedly True Crime from Pontotoc County by Raven Rollins. Now, another question I have. You said that the body was buried, right? So now it's not cheap to bury a body in a cemetery. That costs a lot of money these days. But even though she was paying the funeral home, this director, and all that kind of stuff, to bury a body and buy a cemetery plot, she still was not allowed to see the body. By who?
I'm not really sure, because what I have been told is that because the body was not embalmed, and this was confirmed when I spoke to the funeral home director, and he said that when they do that, they usually go ahead and close that casket up and don't allow viewings because of the decay. He was so decayed, the smell and the bugs and stuff like that. So that's just a normal procedure, and even normal back in 1995. Gail had to basically, she wouldn't have been able to make an ID off of the body anyway because it was so decomposed, and a lot of people suggested she didn't look at it. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of funky stuff going on, when she's planning the actual funeral. It wasn't until later that she started having all of these issues, and by that time he was already buried. So it's unfortunate, but that's just the events that took place.
Yeah, but also too, you said if the funeral guy could see that they had long hair, she could see that. How badly decomposed could it have been? Very, very suspicious situation here. So, and also too, it seems like she has a civil lawsuit against a lot of people here. To fund all this exhumation, all this kind of stuff. Now, what do you think is going on here then with this body?
That I had to take a serious look at what was going on in the world in 1995. And what had actually happened only a couple months prior to Daniel's death was the Murrah Federal Building bombing here in Oklahoma City. The autopsy may have been rushed. The dental comparisons may have been rushed because what I found is that the pathologist who did the autopsy was also in charge of identifying 168 bombing victims. And the odontologist that did the dental comparisons was also in charge of a task force of identifying 168 bombing victims. So I think to me, that part I don't so much see as corruption per se. I think that it was a huge oversight, because I actually did find that in one case of those 168 victims, they had actually misidentified some body parts and sent them with the wrong body. So I think that it was just a very large, confusing time for Oklahoma City. It was unprecedented. They had never dealt with anything like that before. They had hundreds of bodies in the morgue that they were trying to prioritize the bombing victims, because there were 19 children, and, it was this huge deal for Oklahoma. Nothing had ever happened like that before. Now, when it comes to the local boy, I can't rule out corruption there. I don't know if it was ignorance, corruption, whatever it was. They seem to really want to get that case closed, solved, and move on from it just as soon as they could. So I couldn't really say there. But as for, the biggest stuff, the stuff that really could have helped us in figuring out if this was actually Daniel or not, that was just a huge oversight. It's unfortunate, and I wish we could go back, and I wish we could do it again, but it is what it is. So moving forward, along with the family, I also believe that maybe the only answers will lie in an exhumation at this point.
Well, what about suspects? Were there any specific suspects besides this gang? Any specific people at the word? There's informants, all kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I have dozens and dozens of witness statements that I'd gone through. He was in school, so all the school kids were talking, and there were rumors flying, and everything kind of pointed to this one man, this kid gang leader named Anthony Taylor. And he had actually copped to doing this to a bunch of people and actually told them that he did, in fact, kill Daniel with the help of a couple of other gang members. But unfortunately, like I said, the police just kind of seemed to want to close it and move on. They even tried telling Gail that it was a suicide at one point, that he had jumped off this cliff because the body was at the bottom of a 30-foot cliff. They seemed to just not want to deal with it. So they didn't actually do any witness statements any further than just the initial statements. They never went back. They never re-questioned people. They didn't get a lot of alibis. Even the alibi that they got for Anthony Taylor was very shaky. His own father came in and, basically said that, whatever he said that he was with me that night. He wasn't with me. So his alibi fell apart, but it was never reinvestigated. It was never followed up on. None of these people were ever really talked to again after that. And so the rumor mill just kept going and going, and everybody believes that Anthony Taylor did it. But what the more, I think a sad part of this is that even if, new people came in after a while and wanted to reinvestigate this case, Anthony Taylor was actually murdered himself about a decade later. So he's no longer here. And, if he's found responsible for Daniel's death, or at least the death of that body, then, he can't be held accountable anymore. He's already gone. So there's a lot to this case.
Not only that, any informants, if they say, hey, I got this old murder for you, it's Anthony, the cops aren't going to care about that. They're not going to give you a deal on that one. What was the cause of death and manner of death for this Daniel Furr?
So the technical manner of death was traumatic injury to the chest. They couldn't actually tell if it was, in fact, a stab wound or not because the body was so decomposed, but they assumed that it was a stab wound to the chest. He had some markings, some other knife-like markings on other bones, a rib or two, and they just assumed that it was probable stabbing. The weird part about that, though, is that there was really no crime scene. And when I say that is because the body was found by 3 Boy Scouts that were attending their meeting at a church nearby, and they went to play, okay? They go down and they find this body. It's a pit. It's 30 feet down, and you can kind of get down there, and that's where kids would party and play and, go exploring and stuff, and they find this body. It's just the body. There's really no blood around. There's no evidence of a struggle. There's not anything that you would really consider to be a crime scene if this person was stabbed to death or they fell off a 30-foot cliff. It's just very odd.
How much time
I've always
lapsed?
believed.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, no worries. I've just always believed that it's a case of mistaken identity, that there's still a family somewhere out there that's missing a loved one that was identified as Daniel, and Daniel is somewhere else. I don't know where. I've had some tips about it, but he's still missing. To me, he's still missing.
2 quick questions. How much time lapsed between he went missing on July 4th or 7th to the time they discovered this body?
How much time went by?
Yeah.
So he went missing. Technically, we had some people say that they saw him on July 7th.
Right.
There was one person that said they saw him on July 8th, but again, not sure on those. So it would have been 4 days from the time that Daniel was last seen confirmed to the time that this body was found. And when I tell you that it was in accelerated decomposition,
yeah, right, yeah.
There's no way that it could have gotten to that point in 4 days.
Yeah, plus 4 days, it would have been drag marks, footprints, all kind of stuff, man. Now, what about this Anthony Taylor? Was his murder solved?
Yes, that was almost immediately solved. So he had a girlfriend at the time that Daniel was killed, and she actually was one of the people that was, telling others that Anthony had said that he had killed Daniel. Right. I think that it was for clout. I don't think he actually did it. I don't think he knows anything about it. I think that he just wanted people to believe that he was a murderer because he's a gang leader. Right. But this his girlfriend at the time, she has a lot of statements and stuff like that. And they actually had some children together. And later when Anthony was murdered, it was actually his girlfriend's brother who did that. And it was immediately solved. I believe that he didn't even get convicted. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity.
What a mess. What a mess. Okay.
Now you understand why it takes a whole book.
Yeah, well, actually 2 books, it turns out. Raven Rollins, we're out of time. We've been talking to Raven Rollins. She's the podcast host of the Sirens podcast. You can find her on all the podcast platforms. You can find her on Instagram at the Sirens Podcast, on Twitter at The Raven Rollins. You can meet her in person May 24th at Barnes & Noble in Tulsa, Oklahoma on 71st Street between noon and 5. Go down there and get an autographed copy of these books. High reviews on allegedly true crime from Pontotoc County. And we've also been talking about, too, the Sins of the South, a true crime case collection to advocate for. Again, another highly rated on Amazon. Several other books. A Dead World, Book 1. A Dead New World, Book 1 in the 1111 series. The Human Condition, the 1111 series, Volume 2. Whole bunch of books here, and I'm sure you'll be having books in the future. So give us a call, and we'll have you right back. Because a great storyteller here, so you can check out you hear the way she tells a story on the air. So you can tell.
Thank you.
You can tell a story in a book when you have a lot more time, and you're not being constantly interrupted by some annoying host. Okay.
Oh, no, you have excellent questions. Thank you. I appreciate it so much.
But we are out of time, so thank you so much, Raven Rollins. Good night.